Genesis 38 through 42. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for how it has transformed my life. I pray that everyone can enjoy in the joy that your word brings. I'm so appreciative for the comfort in my life that it has given me, the new perspective that it has given me. I continue to ask that we get our way through the whole Bible in the 6 months plan, but your will, not mine. In Jesus' name, amen. About this time, Judah left home and moved to Adullam, where he visited a man named Pharaoh. There he met a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and he married her. She became pregnant and had a son, and Judah named the boy Then Judah's wife had another son, and she named him Onan. And when she had a third son, she named him Shelah. At the time of Shelah's birth, they were living at Kezib. When his oldest son grew up, Judah arranged his marriage to a young woman named Tamar. But was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to Er's brother Onan, "You must marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brothers of a man who has died. Her first son from you will be your brother's heir." But Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with Tamar, he spilled the semen on the ground to keep her from having a baby who would belong to his brother. But the Lord considered it a wicked thing for Onan to deny a child to his dead brother. So the Lord took Onan's life too. Then Judah told Tamar, his daughter-in-law, not to marry again at this time, but to return to her parents' home. She was to return a widow until his youngest son, Shelah, was old enough to marry her. But Judah didn't really intend to do this because he was afraid Shelah would also die, like his two brothers. So Tamar went home to her parents. In the course of that time, Judah's wife died. After the time of mourning was over, Judah and his friend Pharaoh, the Adullamite, went to Timnah to supervise the shearing of his sheep. Someone told Tamar that her father-in-law had left for the sheep shearing at Timnah. Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but they had not called her to come and marry him. So she changed out all her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road at the entrance of the village of Enaim, which is one of the ways to Timnah. Judah noticed her as he went by and thought she was a prostitute since her face was veiled. So he stopped and propositioned her to sleep with him, not realizing that she was his own daughter-in-law. "How much will you pay me?" Tamar asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," Judah promised. "What pledge will you give me so I can be sure you will send it?" she asked. "Well, what do you want?" he inquired. She replied, "I want your identification seal, your cord, and your walking stick you are carrying." So Judah gave these items to her. She then let him sleep with her, and she became pregnant. Afterwards, she went home, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothing as usual. Judah asked his friend Pharaoh, the Adullamite, to take the young goat back to her and to pick up the pledges he had given her. But Pharaoh couldn't find her. So he asked the men who lived there, "Where can I find the prostitute who is sitting beside the road at the entrance to the village?" "We've never had a prostitute here," they replied. So Pharaoh returned to Judah and told him that he couldn't find her anywhere and that the men of the village had claimed they didn't have a prostitute there. "Then let her keep the pledges," Judah exclaimed. "We tried our best to send her the goat. We'd be the laughing stock of the village if we went back again." About 3 months later, word reached Judah and Tamar. His daughter-in-law was pregnant as a result of prostitution. "Bring her out and burn her," Judah shouted. But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent the message to her father-in-law. "The man who owns this identification seal and walking stick is the father of my child. Do you recognize him?" Judah admitted that they were his and said, "She is more in the right than I am, because I didn't keep my promise to let her marry my son Shelah." But Judah never slept with Tamar again. In due season, the time of Tamar's delivery arrived, and she had 2 sons. As they were being born, one of them reached out his hand, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread around his wrist of the child who appeared first, saying, "This one came out first." But then he drew back his hand, and the other baby was actually the first to be born. "What?" the midwife exclaimed. "How did you break out first?" And even after, he was called Perez. Then the baby with the scarlet thread on his wrist was born, and he was named Zerah. Now when Joseph arrived in Egypt with the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, a member of the personal staff of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was the captain of the palace guard. The Lord was with Joseph and blessed him greatly as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. So Joseph naturally became quite a favorite with him. Potiphar soon put Joseph in charge of his entire household and trusted him with all his business dealings. From the day Joseph was put in charge, the Lord began to bless Potiphar for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs began to run smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't have a worry in the world, except to decide what he wanted to eat. Now Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and about this time Potiphar's wife began to desire him and invited him to sleep with her. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I ever do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." She kept putting pressure on him day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he was doing his work inside the house. She came and grabbed him by his shirt, demanding, "Sleep with me." Joseph tore himself away, but as he did, his shirt came off. She was left holding it as he ran from the house. When she saw that she had his shirt and that he had fled, she began screaming. Soon all the men around the palace came running. "My husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to insult us," she sobbed. "He tried to rape me, but I screamed. When he heard my loud cries, he ran and left his shirt behind with me." She kept the shirt with her, and when her husband came home that night, she told him the story. "That Hebrew slave that you had brought around here tried to make a fool of me," she said. "I was saved only by my screams. He ran out, leaving his shirt behind." After hearing his wife's story, Potiphar was furious. He took Joseph and threw him into prison where the king's prisoners were held. But the Lord was with Joseph there too, and he granted Joseph favor with the chief jailer. Before long, the jailer put Joseph in charge of all of the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The chief jailer had no more worries after that because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him, making everything run smoothly and successfully. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended him. Pharaoh became very angry with these officials, and he put them in prison where Joseph was, in the palace of Potiphar, the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and Potiphar assigned Joseph to take care of them. One night, the cupbearer and the baker each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. The next morning, Joseph noticed the dejected look on their faces. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but there is no one here to tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Tell me what you saw." The cupbearer told his dream first. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a vine in front of me. It had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon there were clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed the juice into it. Then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." "I know what the dream means," Joseph said. "The 3 branches mean 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will take you out of prison and return you to your position as the chief cupbearer. And please have some pity on me when you are back in this favor. Mention me to Pharaoh and ask him to let me out of here. For I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I am here in jail, but I did nothing to deserve it." When the chief baker saw that the first dream had such a good meaning, he told his dream to Joseph too. "In my dream," he said, "there were 3 baskets of pastries on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of bakery goods from Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them." "I'll tell you what it means," Joseph told him. "The 3 baskets mean 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will cut off your head and impale your body on a pole. Then birds will come and peck away all your flesh." Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he gave a banquet for all his officials and household staff. He sent for his chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and they were brought to him from the prison. He then restored the chief cupbearer to his former position, but he sentenced the chief baker to be impaled on a pole, just as Joseph had predicted. Pharaoh's cupbearer, however, promptly forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, 7 fat, healthy-looking cows suddenly came up out of the river and began grazing along its bank. Then 7 other cows came up from the river, but they were very ugly and gaunt. These cows went over and stood beside the fat cows. Then the thin, ugly cows ate the fat ones. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. Soon he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain on one stalk, with every kernel well formed and plump. Then suddenly 7 more heads appeared on the stalk, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. These thin heads swallowed up the 7 plumped, well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. The next morning, as he thought about it, Pharaoh became very concerned as to what the dreams might mean. So he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt and told them about his dream. But not one of them could suggest what they meant. Then the king's cupbearer spoke up. "Today I have been reminded of my failure," he said. "Some time ago, you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night, the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had a meaning. We told the dreams to a young Hebrew man who was a servant of the captain of the guard. He told us what each of the dreams meant, and everything happened just as he said it would. I was restored in my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was brought hastily from the dungeon. After a quick shave and change of clothes, he went and stood in Pharaoh's presence. 'I had a dream last night,' Pharaoh told him, 'and none of these men can tell me what it means. But I have heard that you can interpret dreams, and that is why I have called for you.' 'It is beyond my power to do this,' Joseph replied, 'but God will tell you what it means and will set you at ease.' So Pharaoh told the dream. 'I was standing on the bank of the Nile River,' he said. 'Suddenly 7 fat, healthy-looking cows came up out of the river and began grazing along its bank. But then 7 other cows came up from the river, and they were very thin and gaunt. In fact, I've never seen such ugly-looking animals in the land of Egypt. These thin, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat ones and had come out of the river first. But afterwards, they were still as ugly and gaunt as before. Then I woke up. A little later, I had another dream. This time, there were 7 heads of grain on one stalk, and all 7 heads were plump and full. Then, out of the same stalk came 7 withered heads, shriveled by the east wind, and the withered heads swallowed up the plump ones. I told these dreams to my magicians, but not one of them could tell me what they mean.